Is everybody ready? That was directed to you guys. Okay. Rusty, we all set? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Planning and Zoning meeting for the City of Smyrna. Today is August 8th, 2016. It's 6 p.m., not 8 p.m., and this meeting's called to order. For the purposes of our recording equipment, if you could please turn off your electronic devices at this time. For those of you joining us for the first time, this meeting is conducted similar to a council meeting. As such, each application will include a presentation from city staff, followed by a question and answer session between staff and the board. Following staff's presentation, we'll have the applicant present their case and answer any questions from the board. Once all the questions have been satisfied, we'll have an opportunity for anyone in attendance that would like to come forward and speak in favor of or opposition to the application. We do ask you come one at a time, state your name and address for the record, and sign the sign-in sheet at the podium. And please direct all your comments to the board. At this time, we've got a couple of small items we've got to check off, and then we will get to Z16-012. All right, the first item on our agenda is Z16-009. This item is to be tabled to the September 12th, 2016 P&Z board meeting at the request of the applicant. Can we get a motion to table, please? We have a motion to table, Mr. Monroe. We have a second, Mr. Roberts. All in favor? It's approved 6-0. All right, the next item on our agenda is Z16-014. This rezoning case is to be tabled to the September 12th, 2016 P&Z meeting at the request of the applicant. Can we get a motion to table? Motion, Mr. Campo. Second, Ms. Harrington. All in favor? It's approved 6-0. It's tabled 6-0. All right. The next item on our agenda is zoning request Z16-012. This is rezoning from R15 to RM15, conditional for the development of 49 townhome units. It's 3.9 acres, land lots 809 and 847. This is Woodland Terrace and Bell Drive. The Woodbury Group is the applicant. Mr. Martin or Mr. Sudreth? Mr. Sudreth is going to give us the background. Thank you.
Thank you. We actually have been talking internally about this request for a while. The interesting part of what we're dealing with is it's just off of Spring Road, in which we have a study going on of that area, as well as the Georgia Tech study down closer to the Braves development. But at this point in time, we've just started that process, so we don't have any additional recommendations to rely on other than what's already in place, such as our land use plan and our zoning ordinance. So with that in mind, let me take you through what we have. The intersection of Bell Drive and Spring Road is commercial, but behind that is residential. And those first 10 homes on each side, so those first 20 homes are single-family detached residential development. This proposal includes those 5 lots that are there, plus another lot that's actually off of Woodland. When we started talking about this development with the applicant, they originally proposed front-loaded homes, of which we did not feel was appropriate for the area, and suggested that they needed to be rear-loaded, and hence that's what you will see tonight. We've got 49 new townhomes being proposed in those 2 areas. The future development map actually anticipates that this would be a higher density area and would allow an urban residential development, which would be attached housing. And the density for this is our top density that's recommended in the land use plan, and that is it's just density over 6. There is no cap associated with the land use designation here. If you remember, our densities within the land use plan go from 0 to 3, 3 to 4.5, 4.5 to 6, and then above 6. So this is one of those above 6 areas. So the question becomes, what is the right number? Obviously 7 is over 6, and so is 15 and 20 over 6. So what should this area be? So that really became part of the discussion with staff as we went through this application. So this is the area not only on Bell Drive that is actually designated as urban residential. In the back, you've got similar townhome development with higher, again, over 6 units an acre development there. This is the proposed site plan. You can see that they're broken into 2, I will call them pods. There's a pod A that has its access off of Woodland Terrace, and then there's pod B that we will call the Bell Drive section just for simplification. However, the homes that are listed as 13 through 31 on Woodland actually face Woodland Terrace. They are rear loaded, and you could enter them from Woodland or Bell as well. So development pod A, we're dealing with setback issues. These are front loaded on A, so they're requesting variances of 15 and 10 feet with and then the rear they're able to meet. Now in pod B, what we have here are variances. Again, we've asked them to push these up to the street to become rear loaded. So there are front and side setbacks that they're requesting. Both these areas do have open space in pod A. They have a power easement that runs through the development. So on the other side is their open space. They have put all of their development on the west side of that easement. In pod B, you have open space with underground stormwater detention occurring there. For the audience's sake, as well as to remind the Planning Commission, we do have the city engineer present tonight to answer any questions related to stormwater runoff and traffic and so forth. They are proposing, which is normally in a townhome development, that those are private streets. What's a little bit different here on the Bell Drive portion on pod B is we've encouraged them to provide guest parking as parallel parking on Bell Drive, so that you would end up having 9 parking spaces on Bell, and then you have other parking spaces on pod A. They've also requested other variances. You have a 50% to 80% impervious. Given what we have asked them to do, staff does support that. They've also asked for building separation from 30 feet to 10 feet, as well as allowable units per building from 6 to 7. Staff is not supportive of those last 2 waivers. This is a rendering that they provided for the rear entry townhomes off of Bell. And these are or other views, the rear of those. And this is from Woodland Terrace. Again, these are the front entry units. And again, what they look like on the side and rear. I think we're familiar with that area, but there are some photos here just to show you that it is, these lots in question contain single-family detached housing units. I will let the applicant talk to you about what kind of arrangement they have with those particular property owners that are under consideration tonight for the zoning. Again, street views of Bell and Woodland. Anytime we have a conditional zoning, there are standard conditions, and they deal with the composition of the home, the type of protected covenants they have, the open space requirements, stormwater and underground utility issues, traffic improvements, what their entrances are to look like. You have to build streets to city standards, have landscape plans, you have to meet the tree ordinance, decorative street lights, and so forth. All of those are required by the ordinance, but we always repeat those in a zoning to make sure everybody is aware of those requirements. But in addition to that, we also are asking or have put special conditions in this recommendation of approval, both for Pod A and for Pod B with that. So those are the setbacks that staff is willing to support. And again, the same setbacks you can see on the side to side. We're saying 30 feet, not the 10 that they've asked for. We've also said that each building shall be limited to no more than 6 units instead of the 7. It has become a standard for the city over the last half a dozen years that we have 22-foot length on driveways. Sprinklers will be provided in each one of these units. Additional right-of-way is to be dedicated. We talk about sidewalks have to be provided, buffer strips. Again, meeting the tree ordinance and what the planning requirements are. Then the sanitary sewer easement requirements, as well as you look at that last one that's on the screen, shall widen Woodland Terrace to 26 for the length of the development. That's because Woodland is a substandard street at the present. And then these last have to do with the plans that have been submitted and the elevations, in essence, that they are bound to those plans and elevations that we showed. Again, there's the proposed site plan. I will leave this on the screen for people to reference, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the Planning Commission. But that is what you have in front of you is sort of the market. It's taking, in my opinion, it's moving a little bit in a different direction because of the day and age that we are at right now. And so this is one of the first requests to take place. And as I said, it's sort of falling in between when the study starts and when the study completes. So that's what we have. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Any questions for Mr. Sudworth?
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to ask the applicant to come forward, tell us a little bit about the plans, and answer some questions. Good evening, Mr. Sams.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. And good evening, Planning Commission members. For the record, my name is Garvis Sams. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Sams, Larkin, Huff, and Bally in Marietta. I do a good bit of work here, as some of you may know, here in the city of Smyrna. I have with me tonight Mr. David Woodbury of the Woodbury Group and Mr. Todd Prinky of the Woodbury Group, seated on the second row here. Just so you'll be clear and understand this, they'll be developing Pod A on this, or building it, and Pod B is going to be built by Trayton Homes, and the principals that are involved there, they had a meeting in a competing jurisdiction they had to attend, so they're not here tonight for that, but I wanted you to realize that they were part of it as much as Mr. Woodbury and his group. Mr. Martin has a package of information. I don't know if he's handed it out to you yet or not, but it involves the site plan that you're seeing here. It's a colored up rendering. We've got a big board if we need to make reference to that. And it's got the architectural renderings and elevations depicting the architectural style and composition of the buildings. It's helpful to have them obviously on a monitor, but it's also helpful to have them, we think, right before you as well. This is a 3.9 acre tract of land. It's located, as you can see, on the eastern side of Bell Drive, and it's on both sides, at least at one point, of the development itself is on both sides of Woodland Terrace in pods A and B, respectively. As Mr. Sudworth has said, and he does have an ability to cover things I was going to cover, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but this is in an area under your future land use plan, development plan, that's denominated as urban residential, which is sort of a hybrid type of classification, in that there's no cap on the density. I mean, the density is determined, of course, by you upon recommendation, by the staff upon their recommendation, by the mayor and council actually as a policy decision, which is what they did back in 1982 for Afton Downs phases 1 through 3, with densities there range in the various phases from 9.17 to 10.25 units per acre. So it's a range of densities, but it's pretty clearly higher density and well exceeds the 6 unit per acre. I guess you'd call it a minimum. I don't know what would happen if you brought in something under 6 units per acre under urban residential, but that's not what it's designed for. It's designed for high density. And if you're familiar with this area or sub-area in the city of Smyrna, you know it's off Spring Road. It is getting pretty darn near Cobb Parkway, and then right across Cobb Parkway is where the SunTrust and Battery Park is going to be for the Braves. So it's uniquely positioned from a transportational and a land use planning perspective, we think, and it fits right into the development patterns that you're seeing in the Cumberland Galleria area in terms of the improvement district down there. What Woodbury and Trayton propose is a rezoning of this property from its present classification of R15 to RM15 for the purposes of custom, quality-built, single-family attached townhome development consisting of a total number of 49 units at a density of 12.56 units per acre, which, according to the densities in the area, we think is consistent. While this application has been pending, Mr. Woodbury and his staff and my staff have received phone calls, and we've talked to folks not only in area residential sections of the city adjacent to this, but also to business owners along Spring Road in terms of traffic movements, turning movements onto Spring, and of course with respect to the studies that are presently taking place on Spring Road. I think there's 2 studies. They're not competing studies. Hopefully they'll go hand in glove with each other, and we're certainly willing to take the preliminary recommendations of those into consideration, but they really haven't been fully articulated or enunciated at this time. But based on those conversations we've had, and primarily our conversations with your staff, and when I say your staff, I mean Mr. Randall, the city engineer, Mr. Stokes, your public works director, Mr. Sudworth, Mr. Martin, and the planning and zoning divisions, and your fire marshal as well. Based on those conversations and the input we've received from the public, we did submit on July the 21st a letter of agreeable stipulations and conditions, and I copied each of you on that. I hope that you received it back a little less than 3 weeks ago. First of all, this rezoning is going to be specifically from R15 to R15 for the reasons that I've just stated, based upon this plan. This is a revised site plan that we submitted last week based upon tweaking or revisions that needed to be done based upon staff input with respect to the positioning of the buildings, with respect to detention hydrology and downstream considerations, and some other issues as well. It's to be developed, as I mentioned, for townhomes. Not only do we have Afton Downs that ranges up to 12.25 units per acre, but you also have, as you know, on up to the north along Woodland Trace, an assisted living facility that was zoned fairly recently, a high-density residential living facility called Galleria Manor. This property at issue tonight, the 3.9 acres, is sandwiched in between the assisted living and Afton Downs. You've got the subject property, and then along Spring Road, you've got which is not a transitional corridor. It's definitely a commercial corridor going all the way from its intersection with Atlanta Road back down to Cobb Parkway. And there may be pockets of higher density residential and some single family, but for the most part, the closer you get to Cumberland Parkway and Cobb Parkway, the more it transitions into almost a total, as opposed to a preponderance, a total of commercial utilization. You have the renderings of the townhomes. As Mr. Sudreth mentioned, some will be front-loaded, some will be rear-loaded. In Pod B, those will be rear-loaded. If you look at Pod B on the site plan, you can see the private alleyways or easements. Those have been designed in order to accommodate public vehicles such as garbage service and the like in terms of radiuses. Pod A will be a little wider unit, 24 feet in width, and those will be front-loaded units. So we have a majority of the units there will be rear-loaded. The architectural style and composition of the townhomes themselves are going to be sort of like that street scene you saw with the staggered townhomes, to give it sort of I won't say an off-kilter look, but an interesting look, instead of the same replication of townhome after townhome with differing components of the architectural composition, such as brick, stacked stone, hardy plank shake, hardy plank siding as well. This will be on all four sides, various elements of that, or a combination of those. Each of these townhomes, whether they're front or rear loaded, will have room for 2 vehicles in the garage. Now you say, what's unique about that? Well, we've got a stipulation or a condition contained in my letter that states that the garage will be used for vehicular parking, which means it can't be used for storage, but they've got to be able to accommodate 2 vehicles at all times. In addition to that, the city has a rule of thumb with cars and SUVs getting longer and longer to ensure that they're not parked in the driveway such that they are overlapping into the so-called beauty strip along the front or blocking the sidewalk. So all our driveways will be at least 22 feet in length. So you've got 2 cars in the garage, 2 cars on the driveway. But that also necessitates, and if you've seen over the past decade, townhome developments have been done in unincorporated Cobb, Cherokee, City of Smyrna, there's been a paucity of parking. And it's caused problems, not only with respect to the residents in the HOAs, but also with respect to fire and safety and police utilization of their vehicles to traverse these streets that may have cars parked on in an awkward or situation where an impasse ultimately presents itself. So there'll be sufficient guest parking. A lot of cities and counties are coming up with ordinances. For instance, Cobb County has an ordinance that requires 0.5 spaces for every unit, or 1 space for every 2 units of guest parking when you've got residences that are closer than 20 feet. Obviously, these are attached. So we do have that. Now, one thing that Mr. Sudreth brought up and pointed out is that we're to be bound to the architectural renderings and elevations, and we are. If you read my letter, it says in substantial conformity to those renderings. Now, there's no changes or modifications or revisions that are planned for those, but I want you to understand that as opposed to being bound by them, we want staff to have the latitude to be able to approve deviations of a minor degree, such as the elevations I've given you may show a cantilevered component, or may show shutters, or may show, but they're gonna vary from unit to unit, again to stay out of the boilerplate, self-same, mundane look that you see with runs of apartments, 6 units in length. So we're bound by the architectural style and composition, but in substantial conformity to that, and we think it would be appropriate, and we'll ask Mayor and Council the same thing, if you give staff the administrative latitude to tweak those as necessary through the plan review process. All of these homes are going to be for sale only. There is a provision that has that 10% of the homes, a maximum of 10% of the homes at any given time may be for sale, but at a lease term of no less than 1 year. How's that monitored? Monitored by code enforcement, but more importantly by the HOA, which I'll get into in a minute. There's several different layers with subdivisions. Some of them are well run, some of them are horrendously run. And when you've got private alleyways or streets, or you've got private components that the city doesn't maintain, it's absolutely important that you have a vehicle or apparatus in place to ensure that the infrastructure that we're creating and building doesn't fall back into the hands of the city of Smyrna, whether it's built to city specs or not. So, in that respect, we have agreed to a mandatory homeowners association. Everyone who lives here will be required to be a part of that, to pay monthly fees in association with that. And they will be submitting declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and those will contain, among other things, strict architectural controls. But the HOA, by definition, and by the way, these documents will be drafted and then submitted to the city attorney for the city attorney's review and approval prior to the issuance of COs. The HOA will be responsible for the maintenance of all common areas, which includes the alleyways that you see here. Tree preservation areas, as we're required to have. Require community open spaces you see in both Pod A and Pod B. The amenities you see. The mail kiosks that are now required by the United States Postal Service, which, by the way, will be ADA accessible, as will the common areas. Landscape buffers, other landscape areas, and the entrance signage to the development as well. So the HOA has a lot of responsibilities, and we'll say, well, what's to assure us, you as citizens, staff as staff, that the HOA is going to have the wherewithal to be able to enforce this, and knowing many residents in Afton Downs and having actually represented them in the past. I don't know if they remember that or not. Okay, well, I hope that was good, but if not, if it was bad. But in any event, there are issues that are taken sometimes that the HOA has to tend to. And so in order to ensure that the HOA, the Homeowners Association, which is mandatory, is properly funded and is responsible for ensuring the HOA at all times, we will hire a third-party management company that will oversee the day-to-day operations of the mandatory HOA to ensure it's properly insured, that it's properly capitalized, and it's properly funded. And sometimes these include additional assessments to the monthly assessments that are already in place in order to maintain the streets, the alleyways, and the other common features that I've mentioned. We'll be submitting a landscape plan during the plan review process. Obviously, concurrently with the application, we submitted tree preservation replacement plans as your ordinance required. Your arborist has reviewed that. But in addition to that, we'll submit a landscape plan that will be prepared by a registered landscape architect, and it's going to include a number of things. First of all, no one likes to drive through a development or drive by a development and have to look at HVAC units stuck out so that they're observable. So all HVA systems and home utilities will be screened by way of fencing or landscaping. The entry signage to this community will be ground-based, monument-style signs. It'll be irrigated. It'll be landscaped. It'll be lighted in an appropriate fashion in accordance with the city's sign ordinance. All the yards that you see in common areas will be sodded front, side, and rear and irrigated as appropriate, subject, of course, to any water restrictions that may take place that we have no control over. We'll be subject to the recommendations from the City of Smyrna Engineering Department, and of course the city engineers here and can correct me on any of this, but one of the main components of this is stormwater management, hydrology, and downstream considerations. And typically what you see in most subdivisions, most communities, is detention, water quality, and hydrological components that are above ground, that are either reinforced and man-made, or they're dug out into an earthen type of detention or retention or water quality pond. Here, we're following the staff's recommendation with respect to underground detention. Underground detention is more expensive for the developer. It has extraordinary onerous water quality features that add to the cost of the underground detention. But for the most part, you don't see it, you don't deal with it. It's much more efficient than something that's above ground if built to the specifications that your city engineer has dictated thus far. We were asked in the staff analysis, the preliminary staff analysis, to provide a conceptual hydrology report. We did that. It's really more than a conceptual hydrology report. It actually gets into some very detailed information and numbers regarding the generation of stormwater management, how that's going to be handled and detained, and how it's going to actually over-detain to the extent that anyone downstream, living downstream or a business downstream, will not be affected by this. So that was submitted on July 26, 5 days after my stipulation letter. And in sufficient time, we hope for Mr. Randall to have had an opportunity to review that. Certainly we can speak to that, but I think he's the engineer, so I'm sure he'll have some comments if you ask some questions. We'll be providing 5 feet of right-of-way dedication along Woodland Terrace for both Pods A and Pods B. We're widening Woodland Terrace 13 feet from center line for the length of Pod B. In addition to that, the private alleys, I think I've mentioned this, but they're going to be designed or are designed to have the appropriate radii. Oh, it's so funny saying that word, radiuses. I'm going to say that. It may not be proper, but the radiuses, so turning movements with respect to maintenance vehicles and garbage trucks and fire trucks will be able to be accommodated. Also, we'll be installing sidewalks as shown on the revised site plan. We've also interfaced with the city's fire department through the fire marshal, Tim Grubaugh, and he's asked with a great deal of specification that we do certain things. Number one, that this be designed in compliance with Smyrna specifications with respect to ladder truck number 4. Well, I came by the city a couple of days ago on the way to a meeting. It was last Friday down here, and there was truck number 4, and I'm assuming that was ladder truck number 4, so I've been introduced to ladder truck number 4. So we have designed this to meet Mr. Grubaugh's expectations as the fire marshal. Additionally, this plan complies with the city's requirements regarding turning performance analysis. Now, to lay people like you and me, that may not mean anything, but it's critical, particularly in terms of life safety and fire prevention issues, for these fire trucks, whichever is number 4, number 5, whatever it is, to be able to negotiate these streets and to have the proper lineal footage with respect to the fire hose that they have and the proximity to the fire hydrants to be able to fight fire. So we're complying with the turning performance analysis, and I'm leaving that to our engineers as to what exactly that is. I know the city's asked for it and we've agreed to it. We are asking, and if you look at the plan, either the one that I've handed out to you, the one that's showing the monitors, in Pod B, there's one building that has a run of 7 units to it. In Pod A, there's a run of one building that has 7 units attached to it. the city code requires for a run of 5 units tops. So we are asking a variance for that. And the only place we're asking for a 10-foot separation between the runs of the units per building is in Pod B between the 7-unit run and the 6-unit run to the south of that. So we respectfully disagree with staff, at least on that point, and that is that those two variances, that one 10-foot separation, and because these are going to be sprinkled, now one 10-foot separation, the rest of them are 30 feet as the ordinance requires, and those two runs of 7 units per those two buildings in Pod A and B respectively, we are asking that you grant a concurrent variance with that. And when you grant a variance, you don't just do it flippantly. You do it as a part of the rezoning, as a part of your recommendation, and it has to be based on a hardship. And the hardship has to be due and owing to a literal interpretation or enforcement of your ordinance provisions. And we think because of the configuration of the property, I mean the narrowness of it, and the manner in which the topographical aspects are positioned, that we have a hardship due and owing to the configuration and shape of the property. So we do ask for those two variances. They're very important to fitting in the units that we have for the site. And by the way, what you're seeing now includes an elimination of 2 additional units over what were there originally at 51 based on the revised site plan that was submitted last week. We're going to, I may have mentioned this, but it bears repeating again, provide ADA accessible or accessibility to the common areas, and also the community features, and also to the other components of the community that you and I probably haven't even thought about, but will be brought about during plan review. We're also providing a 20-foot setback on the northern end of Pod B with adequate buffering along the shared property line. You see, if you look at Pod B, we don't own the property north of that, so there'll be a 20-foot setback with buffering in between those properties next to that single-family residence that is there. We have provided some guest parking, as Mr. Sudworth has mentioned, and we are agreeable that all this will be subject to the Smyrna Public Works Director's recommendations. There's a number of those. First of all, water is available, and he looks at water and sewer. We got a water and sewer availability letter that was filed concurrently with the zoning application. But water is available within the right-of-way of both Bell and Woodland Terrace. Each townhome will require its own separate 1-inch meter and tap. In instances where existing water taps or sewer taps are not used, that is the homes that are going away as a result of this development, we will be responsible for capping those at the main line in order to comply with the Public Works Director's comments and recommendations. Now, Mr. Stokes is not here tonight, but Mr. Randall, being the Renaissance man that he is, should be able to respond to those Public Works issues as well. As you know, your staff's recommended approval, and that's always, to me, in the context of a zoning, the first step toward gaining more momentum before appearing before you as a recommendatory or advisory body, and their recommendation's important to me. It's important to Mr. Woodbury and to Trayton. But it's subject to not only the standard stipulations and conditions you've seen, but subject to the self-imposed stipulations that you've seen from us. Some of them replicate or overlap staff's recommendations. Some of them are completely different. But by the same token, there's a lot of red ribbons tied around this to ensure this is a quality development and complements Afton Downs and the existing residential, and then acts as the transition from the Spring Road corridor going in a northerly direction through the subject property back to Afton. Under the urban residential land use designation, we're allowed 6 units per acre without any cap. I've been doing this for more years than I care to admit, but I will tell you this, that as long as you have the correct turning radiuses, as long as you've got sufficient fire hose, 300 feet, 150 going in either direction, then that number 6 maybe an arbitrary figure that's picked out. I'm sure Mr. Sudduth will recall differently, and I'm not saying he's arbitrary, but we think that having two buildings with a run of 7 units is innocuous and really doesn't pose a problem from a life safety or a public health type of issue. Your community development department has compared this to Afton Downs and to Falling Waters, where densities range, staff said, from 9.53. I have from 9.17 in Afton Downs up to 12 units per acre in Falling Waters. So the proposal before you tonight falls in line with the densities that are in the area. It falls in line with the transitional pattern of development that you as a planning and zoning board and the mayor and council as the final legislative authority has kept to during at least the times I've been making presentations here. So with that being the case, with the future land use map being in support of this, with your comprehensive land use plan underlying support for this, we do ask that you follow your staff's recommendation, at least with respect to the recommendation for approval, and you give us relief on those two variances that I mentioned. So, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the length of this, but there was a lot to say. So with that being said, we do ask that you as a planning commission recommend to the mayor and the city council that the application be approved as presented to you this evening. Mr. Woodbury, Mr. Prinky, and I are available to respond to any questions, Mr. Chairman, you or the Planning and Zoning Board members may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sams. This
Thank you,
time
Chairman.
I'd like to open the floor for questions for Mr. Sams or the applicant.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the overall plan is? It looks as though there are 15 other properties on that street.
Yes, sir. I probably, Mr. Woodbury can speak more eloquently to that, but I can tell you that there are discussions with other residents north of this to add to this in a phased situation. David, could you talk to that issue? Sure. Okay. This is David Woodbury of the Woodbury Group, and he's been more on the ground in touch with that. Mr. Moreau, so I'm going to let him respond to that. Do I need to swear him in? No? Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Woodbury.
Good evening, David Woodbury with the Woodbury Group. So about 10 years ago, somebody tried to put all these properties together. There's 20 single-family homes on Bell Drive, 10 on the right side and 10 on the left side. And that didn't work out either because the plan wasn't right or the timing wasn't right for a lot of the owners there. So we've got these first 5 on the right on Bell, and we're in discussions with others that about doing a future phases. And eventually, depending on where people are in their life and timing wise, I think eventually the street will probably be developed, as proposed or into townhomes. But it's going to take time. But we think this is the first step.
They're active, to Mr. Monroe's question, they're active negotiations with other people on the street at this point.
There are. Yes, sir.
Any other questions for the applicant? Mike, just push the button on the right shoulder.
Thank you. As a community member here, it's very frustrating having young kids in schools and seeing a proposal to put take away 5 single-family homes and put this many in. What have you done anything to work with the Cobb County School Board or anything to support when this many more families join us in Smyrna, when we already have schools that are bursting at the seams?
You asked, have we done anything with the Cobb County schools, in what respect?
Any sort of respect in terms of donating money to the local schools for more playground equipment or anything like that, being a good community member, and realizing the impact that it's going to have. I realize that you as a developer cannot build a new school yourselves, but is there any sort of communication between you and the Cobb County School Board so that they're also aware of what you're trying to put into this area?
Not at this point. That's something that we kind of generally do at a later stage once it moves forward. And a lot of these are going to be singles and young couples because of the size.
That's what
of it.
everybody
Yeah.
says.
Well, the townhome product kind of lends itself to that, but I'll let Garvis speak to that.
Yeah, and David hadn't seen this yet. He will on his next bill. But I've spoken. The county school system have planners that look at every zoning issue for all the cities in unincorporated and in unincorporated Cobb County as well. So I've talked to one of the planners, and Mr. Campbell, I believe was his name, in order to just let him know that we're here. And we want to be a partner in education. Had there been any talks with any degree of specificity? No. And the reason for that is they wait until a project is entitled, and when I say entitled, rezoned. But before COs are issued, they expect us to sit down at the table with them with more definitive plans. So there will be opportunities to be a partner in education with respect to not only the local schools, but with respect to the local schools.
I would hope that it'd be with
Yeah,
respect,
with
to,
respect
the
to the
local schools that are
and
going to be the ones impacted.
let's face it. I mean, I know Mayor Bacon has said this time and again. It feels like sometimes Smyrna gets the short end of the stick when it comes to educational resources that are out there, and I don't mean to attribute anything or take words out of the mayor's mouth, but in some respects he's right, and they need more attention. And so with every application I have, whatever jurisdiction I'm in, I always touch base with the school board planners to find out what their situation is, and we'll continue that dialogue. But we have nothing specific right now.
Thank you, Mr. Sams. Any other questions?
Can you tell us what are the price points of these townhomes?
I'm sorry I missed that. It's funny that in Cobb County they're asking us to stay away from the price points because they say they can't legislate that. So, but it's in my stipulation letter as a footnote: $360,000 to $450,000. That's kind of the sweet spot now. You're finding the $800,000 and $900,000 townhomes, and you find closer to the Cumberland Galleria, core, the CCID. There's a little bit more of an abundance of those, almost too many. So these are the decision makers. They thought this was the sweet spot in terms of marketability. And I know everyone says this, but millennials are ruling a lot, and they expect a lot of the bells and whistles you're going to see on the interior of these, with the elevated ceilings, the granite countertops, and circumstances that we can't provide, and which millennials look for, are highly amenitized townhomes. But we think the proximity to the Braves and the inordinate amount of entertainment and restaurants. I was lucky enough to be, or our firm was lucky enough to be able to represent the Braves in connection with that rezoning and entitlement. And I say that only for one reason. We are, and David and Todd and I have talked about this, the highly amenitization of this comes from what is nearby, and not necessarily within driving distance, within walking distance of this. And there are plans on Spring Road that probably you're cognizant of, but you're going to see Spring Road just evolve into not just a major transit corridor it is, but a major arterial leading to probably the main moneymaker in not only this sub-area of Cobb County, but in Cobb County alone. So we really are targeting millennials on this. So we'll see.
Good. Another question for you, Mr. Sams.
Good afternoon. This is actually toward the developer. Looking at the green space that you have on your design here, the ratio seems very out of balance, considered you got 3.9 acres. And of course, you got the impervious surface going from 50% up to 80%. I just wonder why you couldn't incorporate more green space for these tenants.
Well, we're actually well over the recommended or what's by code of 200 square feet per unit, and we're well over that by a substantial amount. And I think it's just maybe a visual thing, but and we thought about that. We think that's important, and we actually increased that upon staff's recommendation. We went back and redesigned it, and we were able to get some more additional green space in there.
Will there be any amenities in these areas to?
Right now, we're planning for outdoor fireplaces as a community gathering spot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodbury. All right. At this time, we're going to open the floor for any citizens in attendance that may want to come forward and speak in favor of or opposition to this application. Please come forward one at a time.
I'm not on the list. Do I have to sign in?
No, please just come forward and sign in. State your name and address for the record, please.
Susan Melanie Levy. I'm the original, very first owner in Afton Downs.
Welcome, Ms. Lee.
So I've been in Smyrna for a long time. I bought in Afton Downs where the road was in. I have a couple of concerns. One, this Woodland Terrace, that road is also an easement back behind, goes back, my property line goes up to that. That's an easement for Georgia Power, and it was originally used as a construction road. So once this A is done, you are planning to go ahead and go beyond
Ms.
about
Levy,
the other 5 or 6.
Ms. Levy, if you just please direct your comments to us, and we'll
I'm
ask,
sorry.
We'll ask.
I'm
It's
sorry.
okay.
I didn't know. So anyway, with that road being an easement for Georgia Power and was a construction road, what effect is this going to have on that easement for the Georgia Power and also on our property? Because my property actually goes up to the fence of the Walton apartment units.
Okay.
That's
We'll get that answer
okay
for you.
The other thing is Bell Drive. Now, the traffic light there, I was the one that had the fight to get that in because the builder couldn't do it, and he had to do with city and county and whatever. If they come out on Bell Drive, that's going to be a horrendous traffic issue. And if they go on to the other side of the road, which I understand from what they've said is down the road, there's going to be only the exit to Bell Drive. They're not going to be able to exit, beyond the little strip shopping center there. So with that proposed phase, I'm concerned about the additional traffic onto Bell Drive and that traffic.
That's a good question.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Levy. All right. Good evening.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Good, doing fine. I'm Harold Greathouse. I represent my mother, Edith Greathouse, that lives down the road a bit on the west side of Bell Drive, where we've lived for 51 years. I'm very concerned about this development in relation to water runoff. I see that they have this underground mitigation in Pod B, which differs from the original plat we got that had retention ponds, if you will, and green space. But one thing we're missing here is Bell Drive is the topography. Bell Drive comes downhill, levels out very briefly, and goes up to Afton Downs. Our property is in the valley, so that water runoff is coming to us. And we currently, even under the current system with permeable ground, we get back up into our backyard, probably a quarter of our property, maybe a third, during a heavy rain. So I can't take a whole lot more water when the rains get bad. So we would just like you to take that into consideration. My mother lives there on her own. She's 85. And we're also very concerned about access to and from the area as the population density increases, because her safety, to me, of course, is paramount. But those are our two concerns about what's been proposed so far.
Thank you, Mr. Greathouse. We'll let the city engineer to speak to that here in a few minutes. Okay.
Mr. Greathouse, can I ask?
Yes, sir.
Can you give me the address of your mom's property?
2742. It's on the west side, about half, maybe 2/3 of the way down the street, right at the bottom of the. You can't miss it. When you get to the bottom, you're there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Any other comments? Good evening and welcome.
It's Judith Calabrese. I live at 5194 Afton Way. My problem is your parking. Now, somebody mentioned here that it would be 9 parallel parking spots on Bell Drive. Bell Drive is a 2-lane road. Please don't tell me they're going to park at the curb. And being that there's only one way to get in and out of Afton Downs, which is Bell Drive, if there's a problem on Bell Drive or if there's a lot of traffic, we have a problem with the emergency vehicles getting through, ambulances, fire trucks, police cars. How many of these private alleys are going to exit onto Bell Drive? Or will there be no private alleys going to Bell Drive, that everything will be going to Woodland, which it should be?
We will ask the question if we haven't answered it already.
And also, too, is the problem with the traffic light on Bell Drive in Spring. You could die waiting for that traffic light to change. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody anywhere, and you're still sitting there. So I assume there will be a traffic light on Woodland in addition to the one that's on Bell? And will there be access? Let's say if I cut past H.H. Gregg, which I sometimes do, and I come out Woodland, will there be a way to cut through on these private alleyways to get to Bell Drive so that I don't have to go on Spring Road?
I can't answer that, but we'll get the answer for you, okay?
How will it get back to me or to us?
Tonight.
Merciful heavens.
If you stay long enough, we'll try to answer all the questions.
You guys are quick. Okay, let me sign my name. Anybody else wants to come up, they can.
Now, we don't guarantee you'll always like the answer. We just try to get you the answer.
Oh, that doesn't make me feel happy.
Just kidding.
You're not giving me a warm spot there.
I was trying with a smile, but you said stop smiling. Would anybody else like to come forward at this time? Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. My name is Larry Shorey. I live at 5016 Bell Drive.
Good evening, Larry.
And I just want to point out, I don't really have any question. The plan is the plan. And it's just more things to consider and some of my concerns. So let me just begin. My trade is I'm an engineer. And I mention that because I tend to not live in legalities or whatnot per se. I tend to live more in reality. And with that said, now, based on what I understand with the plan, we're adding approximately 49 townhomes with approximately 2 cars per home. So we're talking about, at a worst case scenario, 98 extra cars. Now, that's distributed between the Bell Drive and also Woodland Trace. But the concern is more in, not necessarily in the immediate area, but a little bit broader. Let's consider the Braves, the traffic nightmare that is causing or is going to cause. It's already bad enough as it is. And, you know, I work about 1.5 miles to 2 miles from where I live. In the morning, it takes me 10 minutes at most to get there because I get up really early. But at night, it can take me up to 30 minutes sometimes to get home. So my biggest concern is the traffic density that's going to cause in the nearby area and also in our local community as well, in Afton Downs and Bell Drive specifically. The other thing that they alluded to, but it's not up there, is that they're working towards a future Pod C that is not up there, and that's only going to cost more cars to be in the area. And then also, as a resident of Afton's Down, I don't know if you guys have driven there often or not, but I can tell you right now, parking is a near nightmare. And I believe this, even with some guest parking, I believe it's still going to be bad. It's already bad as is with our neighborhood. Something you alluded to, Emily, with regards to taxes and the school district, and I just, this came up to mind, as I'm sure a lot of us already know, our property taxes have been going up, And with more people in there, likely going to have kids as well, not just millennials. It's going to increase also the school taxes, I would imagine, as well. So that's going to be like a double hit as well with taxes with that many units. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Mr. Shorey. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else? All right. Can we have the city engineer come up for a couple minutes and just give us some information, try to help answer some of the questions that we've had presented?
I can try. For the record, I'm Eric Randall. I'm a city engineer for Smyrna. Excuse me. And I have a frog in my throat. Sorry about that. Heard a couple of things mentioned in these comments. Stormwater management and detention, parking on Bell Drive, and traffic signal at Bell. I will try to provide some background information, what we've looked at and what I think some of the fallout's going to be. As far as, well, thank you. You're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you. More of the zoning applications that have come in recently have been going higher densities on the available property. And it's not design and construction the way it was 20 years ago. So I have undertaken asking for concept hydrology studies during zoning. It's unusual to do that. When I was a consultant, we never had to do that. There was always room to make it fit. We're running out of room or it becomes cost prohibitive. That's why I've asked for the concept at this point. And they have done that. And that led to making sure that there was room for detention on a preliminary analysis and configured in a way that is not going to box things in later on. The initial concept was to bury pipes under the rear entry driveways and that common driveway, which in 30 years means when the corrugated metal pipes fail, all of that gets torn out. And you've effectively cut off access to people's homes for the duration of that maintenance effort decades down the road. That stipulation led them to this current revision, which is, again, conceptual. Don't know what the actual volumes are going to be, but the analysis that we'll be looking at during construction plan review includes what we refer to as a downstream analysis. And that's where you look at every point that this subdivision would flow to until the area is 10% or less of the contributing watershed. So this is going to be at a point somewhere down beyond Jonquil Park, heading for falling water, perhaps into falling water. And it will look at the pipe sizing along the way. And for reference, this is something similar that was done for Tackett Farms, single-family residential subdivision on Concord Road. And those detention facilities came out sized about 3 times what you would expect because they did not surcharge the pipes downstream, through the Bennett Woods neighborhood. I would be looking for a similar performance metric here, how to ensure there is no adverse effect downstream up through the design conditions. The caveat to that is what happens when it exceeds the design conditions. It was just a couple of weeks ago, we got 5 inches of rain in an hour and a half. For perspective, that's about 0.1% chance of getting that in any given year. The 1,000-year storm. Very slim chance to get volumes like that, and when you get those volumes, there is flooding and there are water issues. Shy of those, we will look at this at the construction plan review to ensure adequate storage and sufficiently reduced flow rates that it does not create an adverse effect downstream. Parking on Bell Drive. Actually, let me jump in here rather than my going all over the place. Any concerns, anything further about detention? Stormwater management.
Well, Mr. Grayhouse said that he gets a quarter to a third backup during in his backyard during a rain event. a substantial rain event.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that that substantial rain event will yield less backup in his yard.
Yes. And
you're comfortable with that based on the information that they've provided?
to the extent, yes, that when you do any development, you increase the volume, but you're looking at flow rates.
Right.
At a minimum, what comes from this area would be reduced by 10%. I expect that when all is said and done, when the final design comes through, it will be looking at a 20 to 30% flow rate reduction, but there's still volume over time. So at the end of the day, Mr. Grayhouse, there you are. What I'm expecting is you'll have more volume flow through, but it will be reduced and spread out over a longer period of time.
So I get a bigger lake. That's what you're saying.
Well, as a secondary issue, let's talk after this to see if there's a problem downstream. Because if there's something that's keeping it from draining, that's a separate issue for me to deal with.
Right.
Okay? Anything else on detention? Yes, ma'am.
You had mentioned that there might be replacement issues when they had originally thought about putting it under the garage. So where they're proposing to move it to now, will that need to be maintained and possibly replaced at some point? And if so, is the homeowners association required to do that themselves, or is that the city that would come in and assist them with that?
It would be the homeowners association. The maintenance concern is twofold. One, every new subdivision, every stormwater management facility we have, we are now requiring an inspection and maintenance agreement to be prepared by the developer with exhibits supported by the design engineer to say this is how you maintain it. If you will, it's an owner's manual for detention. We're undertaking a really, really big effort to do that throughout the city, but trying not to make the problem worse by catching new subdivisions, new development as it comes online. It is something that will be the responsibility of the homeowners association, and anything that happens along the way that has to get repaired, or should the system fail entirely, that is a homeowners association responsibility, as would be paving for the rear access road. All of these private facilities would be homeowner association owned and maintained.
And the city makes sure that these detention ponds are maintained and
Yes.
have the current agreement.
Yes.
Okay.
And that agreement is, at the time of final plat, I review the final copy of it before the first CO is listed, because the inspection maintenance agreement has to get recorded at Cobb County and attached to the plat. It can't be done before we issue permits. I mean, that's the plat. But once that plat is identified, we then have that recorded, and they submit a copy of that recorded inspection maintenance agreement tied to the plat. So it's in place for the subdivision.
Can you talk about the Georgia Power easement?
As she was mentioning that, I pulled it up online, and what I see is that it is all private property. The Woodland Terrace right-of-way ends, just abruptly ends, and that it is an easement across private property. This would do absolutely nothing further to that. This would have no bearing on that. It's an easement across private property, so nothing further would happen from that.
All right.
Are we able to access and go through the access into our private property when they need to mow down, cut down the trees and everything?
The road would remain the same as it is today at that end. There would be no change. It's still just going to tee in and end like that.
Is there a road that's going to be from Afton Downs to Cobb Parkway?
Hang on one second. Let's get through our list of questions, then we'll let you guys come back up if there's more if we don't answer them.
Comment was made about parallel parking on Bell Drive.
Yeah.
We have required that to be placed, if you will, behind the curb. That will be widened for those parking spaces. It will not be parking along the current curb line. There'll be bump outs for that, so it would not create an obstruction.
So the road's getting wider where there would be
parallel parking
parallel
spaces.
parking.
Correct, with a sidewalk behind that.
Okay. Do we have any planned improvements for the intersection at Bell Drive in spring?
Other than what's underway, which currently it's we are adding a westbound lane on the north side of Spring Road from Cobb Parkway, which terminates at Bell Drive. And it terminates into a right turn lane rather than a taper. Tapers create problems with driveway access. Tapers create problems with nosing in. There will still be merge, and there will be signs for merge as part of that. But rather than just ending a lane, it gives it a place to actually turn out and provide some sort of egress in the event that here's where it goes, as well as the people that live there have a better access to that point.
To get in, what about getting out?
We'll analyze the traffic signal timing as need warrants. I get lots of phone calls about, hey, can you change the timing on, or can you add a left turn signal too, and these kinds of questions. And the answer is yes, we'll look at that. We do have a project in concert with Cobb County where we are putting an adaptive traffic timing system on the Spring Road corridor from Jonquil to Cobb Parkway and tying into that adaptive system on Cobb Parkway. So you've got a network talking to each other, measuring traffic, seeing the number of cars that are in each lane and making each turn, and it will adjust the timing accordingly and also provide for a more effective way of changing the timing for game events, get people to clear out of that area much more effectively. So we have some infrastructure work going on there.
What about the question about the alley access? I believe the idea is to get all the way over to, what is it, Hargrove, without having to get on Spring. Is there any planned alley?
Not from the city side of things. It's all across private property.
It's private property, right?
So there's nothing I could.
So that would be for each property owner's right to either allow or deny access.
Right. And what I'm kind of expecting is once this is in place, people are going to say, hey, I can cut through this parking lot, and this homeowners association is going to be calling me saying, you've got to make them stop, and I'm going to say, you need to put in speed humps, because that's the effective way of stopping people. This is a private street. This is a private access to these rear. It's essentially going on somebody's driveway. So it would be up to the homeowners association to either foster or block through traffic. Same thing on the shopping center side of things.
Would making it a gated community be a problem? Because that speed hump's not gonna stop anybody.
No, but it would slow people down and make them and discourage them.
Let me take that back. It would stop me. I can't stand them.
Yeah. Well, you got a Ferrari. Come on.
What's to stop somebody from coming and parking on your parallel parking and then walking to the Braves game? And then not leaving that for the private residents? I mean, is there any sort of why, I guess let me rephrase that. Why did you choose to put it still on Bell Drive rather than embed it into the private property?
I think
it's done very well, but I'm just.
I will leave that for the developer. We in one of those coordination meetings, we suggested more guest parking. We do not have a stipulation in our zoning code of specifically requiring a number, so we said do what you can, and this was the solution they came up with.
Sorry, just one more. Do we have anything currently with the Braves coming in for any of these residential streets to make it like residents-only parking on these streets within a distance from the stadium? Has that been brought up at all by council or the engineering?
There's been discussions modeling Cobb's parking ordinance, which became a bit of a fiasco. We have not done anything further with that. They're public streets. They can be, as long as there is not an obstruction to life safety. If somebody's parked there and you can't get a fire truck through, they're going to get towed, and they can pick it up from Howard's or Barrow or whomever. But no, there has not been anything meaningfully done to say this is how we're going to prevent people from parking on public streets. What I would suggest is in this area, if this is the plan that goes forward with having this parallel parking, then I would probably look for some signage on the final construction drawings that say park in designated spaces only. That effectively precludes parallel parking out on the curb areas next to where people are parked. So, any other questions?
Any other questions for Mr. Randall?
Thank you.
Yeah, please come forward. There's two more questions back here, and then we're going to keep going, okay? So ask really good questions, because I'm afraid we'll get locked down asking the same thing. So come on. You don't want to ask it now. Well, I just gave you an extra question then.
This might appear to be a stupid question.
No. Welcome back.
Huh? It probably is. The private alleyway, I just need a yes or a no. Is the private alleyway going to empty onto Bell Drive?
I'll ask that question. Okay. Is the private alleyway going to empty onto Bell Drive? All right. We'll get that answer for you tonight. Good evening and welcome. You're going to come join us anyway.
I am. I've heard that there
Name
is
and address for the record.
I'm
please.
sorry, Janet Moss, and I live on Bell Drive.
Welcome,
And
Miss Moss. What's your street address?
2719.
Okay. Well, welcome.
And also in reference to Mr. Greathouse, who lives across the street from me, there is a neighbor that's 2 doors down from me, Marvin Bennett, and his yard is constantly flooded, as well as mine. And I do mean you could go fishing out there.
Yeah.
Okay, but the second question is, I've heard that there is going to be a new road built in Afton Downs that will connect to Cobb Parkway. Does anybody know anything about that?
We can ask that question and see if there's anybody here that knows it. Thanks for joining us, Ms. Moss. Is anybody, staff, Eric, anybody know the answer to that? Okay. We don't know the answer to that. And then the other question that we just had about the alley access. Can the applicant talk about the alley access, please? I believe that was the question.
Sure. May I respond to her question first?
Absolutely.
I deal with DOT, Cobb DOT, every day. I'm conversant with the plans that were just unveiled for the stadium. So, and I'm also aware of the north-south connector they have planned and are trying to fund between Terrell Mill and Windy Hill. And in all the plans I've looked at during the past 6 months, but more specifically during the past 3 weeks, there are no plans for a connection from Afton to Cobb Parkway that I have seen.
So to your knowledge, you haven't seen anything?
I have not seen anything.
Okay.
And I don't know if anything's in the works, and perhaps it's held close to the vest or not, but I think they're kind of trying to show their cards right now in terms of traffic circulation plans and to get the buy off from the commissioners. The other question about the parallel parking on Bell, even though it was ultimately our decision to position the parking in such a fashion, it is embedded on our property. It's not within the city's right of way. It'll be signaged, or it'll be signed, it'll have signs on it that'll have the requisite statutory language that you have to have in case someone parks illegally to have it towed, and the HOA will be responsible for enforcing that and calling the appropriate record company to do that. And all that information will be on the signage. And trust me, because we need the guest parking, we'll strictly enforce that as a part of the covenants.
Okay.
There's another question, I think.
The alley access on Bell Drive.
Alley access there'll be alley access onto both Bell and Woodland Terrace.
There'll be alley access on both.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the applicant? You want to come back to the mic, Renaissance man?
Mr. Sam, something you just said gave me pause. My understanding is that the sidewalk and those parking spaces were in part of the property to be dedicated so that it is a public access sidewalk, that there's not liability for the HOA, and therefore those spaces would be dedicated as well. So I think that's a question in my mind.
Okay.
It will be dedicated, but in the form of an easement. So our property will be burdened by this easement, but it'll still be on our property for enforcement purposes. So Eric and I are both correct.
Okay. Any other questions from up here? Good evening and welcome.
Wendy Prater, 5184 Afton Way.
What was your name again?
Wendy Prater.
Wendy Prater. Welcome, Miss Prater. You're going to be our final contestant tonight, Miss Prater.
Oh, good. What do I win?
Let me answer that after your question.
no one has addressed so far the question of the traffic.
Yeah.
If anything happened like to my husband and I had to rush him out and there's all this traffic pouring out onto Bell Drive, what's going to happen?
That's a very good question. And unfortunately, the more we densify our population, the more it's a challenge.
Because they're not going to do anything to help us and down there.
We're going to make sure that it's done correctly by the developers if they get approval to have access in and out. And we're going to have to let people do their jobs to make sure that occurs. But we haven't voted, so I can't even talk about whether or not that may or may not occur. All right. Any further comments from up here? All right. Without any further comments, I'd like to entertain a motion for Z16-012.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we table this request at the time. There's some issues with the density that are a concern I'd like to see addressed. So I'll make a motion that we table Z16012 at this time.
Got a motion to table the item. Do we have a second? We have a second. Ms. Harrington, in favor of, or please vote. Motion to table carries 6-0. Mr. Sams, thank you for your presentation. I know it's not the favorable outcome, but
well, anything short of a recommendation for denial is quite favorable, and I count that as a W. But that being the case, will we have specific instructions? I know he wanted us. Mr. Roberts wanted us to look at density, and it is his ward, and we'll certainly do that. Were there any other specific instructions, Mr. Roberts, you wanted us to look at?
I think the future build-out, you don't have the C on here. I think that would be something that you're obviously planning to do. It would be more comprehensive to have all this development looked at, I think.
Well, and I understand. That's something that staff had mentioned. Let me tell you two reasons why that wasn't shown. It wasn't to be disingenuous or secretive or fly under the radar, because with social media and everything being what it is, there are no secrets anymore. It had to do with not so much the cost of doing that, but to appear presumptuous in the context of presenting a master plan to you guys when some of the folks out here may be a part of that and may not want to be a part of it. So we can do that, but it would be something that we wouldn't want to keep it from the folks in Afton Downs, but we want there to be an understanding that it is not as being presumptuous that we're going to be able to acquire these properties or not. But
right.
So density and then master plan.
Mr. Sams, the big concern seems to be another large concern. not to talk over Mr. Roberts, but the traffic issue.
Yes, sir.
I'm confident that the developer and city staff can work to at least improving the water situation. But the traffic issue, getting in and out, it seems like we're gonna fix the issue getting in. And it's easy to talk about traffic problems on Spring Road today with all the construction, and everybody up here lives in this area. I recently had my left-hand turn to my office taken away, and it doubled my commute. Now, I got a whole 7 minutes now, but it has been problematic for me. So I am very sensitive to it, and we're also sensitive to the issues with the schools.
Sure.
And the impact that you guys are going to have on those schools there. So, but I would recommend that we try to at least address the traffic issue for these residents that are going to live through it. And you may want to speak to the construction traffic as well.
Well, the construction traffic will be limited to the parking of construction vehicles on site. Obviously, they have to get to the property either through Woodland Terrace or Bell. But we'll coalesce with staff on all these issues and meet with them, and they'll point us in certain directions, and we'll come back with some preliminary information from Mr. Roberts, Mr. Chairman, and the Planning and Zoning Board, and then be prepared. Can you tell me, Mr. Martin, when the next P&Z meeting is? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
September 12th. Yes, sir. We'll see you next month.
Yes, sir.
All right. Without any further business, do we have any further comments up here? No. Without any further business, I'm about to. That's what I'm trying to do. One time I forget the minutes, and then they're all over me every time now. This is crazy. I thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. All right. We need to approve the minutes from the July 11th, 2016 Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Motion, Mr. Campo, to approve. Second, Mr. Rice. All in favor? Minutes are approved 5-1. Somebody abstained. Somebody wasn't here last week. Okay. Well, they're approved with or without you. All right. Without any further business, this meeting is adjourned at 7:26. Yes, ma'am.
Since this has been tabled for another month, what happens to the mayor and council meeting? Is that going to be pushed back also?
It'll all get pushed back.
It'll be pushed back, so we'll have another new sign on Bell Drive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, the sign on our road
Gets moved. It gets moved, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
The mayor and council meeting was scheduled for the 19th, but the planning and zoning board, they tabled it, so it's gonna have to come back. So the P&Z will change to the 12th, and then the mayor and council will change to the 12th.
Then I can take a look downstream.
It's been that way for years and years and years and years.
I've been plugged for years and years and years and years.
There's a I keep wanting to call it sewer, but there's a.
Come this side to me.
Yeah.
I'm glad they did. Our ABCs.
Turn, but I drive a pretty big truck, so doing that U-turn is kind of a pain in the rear.
And it just mainly runs through there.
Over there when it rained real bad and then it hit ice over, and I would go in to check on it because
Essentially be a problem, so we're just trying to. I guess
I'll
it
see you.
starts right there and
available video of this meeting?
Guys will know.
Yeah. Help you.
Yeah, I remember you.
Hey, how you doing?
Did our attorney
A number of issues.
Yeah.
All the way back from Charlene Capiloutis.
It's right there, but
she was a long time ago.
After she was off, she hired a so even though, I don't think this adversarially is going to work.